what I'm doing. But the first piece, the second piece, and the third piece, they're all going to be on this graph. Usually, and you don't have to do this, but usually the first thing I do, we're going to switch pieces over at these numbers that are in the domain. So x value is less than -3, between -3 and 4, and then 4. So usually the first thing I do is I just draw like a little dotted, give me 1 second. I usually draw like a little dotted, I usually draw like a little vertical line where we're going to switch. So, ooh, siren's going. All right. So I'm going to draw one at -3, and I'm going to draw one at 4. So I know, like, the first piece will be on the left side of that first vertical line I drew. The middle piece will be in between the two vertical lines, and then the third piece will be to the right of the second vertical line that I drew. All right, so here's what I am going to write down. This first piece says x plus 2, and this says for x values less than -3. Now, this would be left of -3 is what that means. Less than would be going to the left. So I want that first piece only on the left side of -3. So I usually I'm just going to make a teeny tiny little table, like an XY chart. But what I do, instead of writing Y, I write down like what the piece was, because that's what I'm going to actually do. Or I'm going to plug into that. That's the actual piece, but that would be the Y coordinate of the point. Okay, now here's what you do. Whatever that number is in the little inequality, this is -3, that's what you want to start with, because it's somehow going to interact with that little vertical line that I drew. Now, me personally, since it says less than, I know that it's just a plain less than, so it doesn't actually touch this point, so it's going to be an open circle. If it was less than or equal to, I'd make a little closed circle. And then I just need to think of, like, what would be a number smaller than -3? Bless you. So like -3, like what would be another number that would be smaller than -3 or left of -3? -4, right? Like, just go to the left. You can put in whatever you want. I'm just going to do a couple points. So you can put in any number you want. Maybe try to go with numbers that would be on the graph. Like, I wouldn't plug in -100 because I wouldn't be able to see that on the picture I have here. But I'm just going to plug in a couple values. So if I actually thought about plugging in this x value, this would be -3 plus 2. So the corresponding y value would be -1. If I plugged in -4 to the little piece there, -4 plus 2 would be -2. And if I did -5 plus 2, that'd be -3. All right, so make sure you only pick numbers less than -3, so left of -3. On the -3, I'm going to have an open circle at -1. And I'm just going to plot, these other points would be filled in. So -4, -2, -5, -3. And I'm only going to the left, so you guys can see the slope there. The slope should just be like up 1/1 between the points, which it is. But you're only going to play connect the dots going to the left, because that piece is only left of that. And that's all you have to do. There's our piece, because it's just going to go to the left of -3. All right, now, depending on what the piece is, in this case, the piece is just 6 in the middle. So it's just going to be a horizontal line. You don't have to make a full-on table if you guys can kind of know what this looks like. But that middle piece, you're going to have x values, but your y value, no matter what, is going to be 6. It's going to create a horizontal line. So you're not going to plug anything into that second piece. What I always do with the second piece, especially if it's a line, just use the two numbers in the inequality, because you know it's going to touch those 2 points. So -3 and 4. And then if it's a line, I just play connect the dots between these two. This will just be a horizontal line. Now, because it says x is greater than or equal to -3, this first point I'm going to graph will be a closed circle, but then it just says x is less than 4. So that second point I'm going to graph will be an open circle. This means x is between -3 and 4. That's what that inequality means. So between those two vertical bars that we drew on there. This way it'll be a function. So at -3, I'm not actually plugging anything in because the piece is just 6. So like no matter what, the y-coordinate would just be 6. So this middle piece, -3, I'm going to go up to 6. I'm going to make a closed circle right there. And then the other point I plugged in was just 4, because that's where it's going to stop. That would also be 6, but this will be an open circle because of the way the inequality symbol is. And then we're just going to play connect the dots between the 2 points. So that's the second piece. Horizontal lines are my favorite because we don't really have to think about it too much. All right, and then our third piece here is going to be... All right, I'm going to ask you a question on this one to make it easier. Okay, this first one, or the third one, sorry, we're going to have x values right of 4, so like greater than or equal to 4. So I'm going to set up a little table again. Do -1/2 x minus 2 here. Okay, now no matter what, plug in whatever numbers in that inequality because that's what's going to start you off. So I'm going to plug in 4. And I just make a little note for myself, since it was x is greater than or equal to 4, that that point will actually be a closed circle. Okay, and then I need to think of like a number bigger than 4, or to the right of 4 if you want to look on the graph visually. Would you pick 5 to plug in? Why not? Why not? It's not divisible by, you don't have to pick the next number. Like I would pick like 6 or 8 or something like that. Pick an even number because you know you're going to multiply it by a half. You don't have to pick 5. You don't have to pick the number right next. Like I could do 6. I wouldn't put 7. I mean, I could put 7 in there, but then you're going to kind of have to estimate where the point is. So if you've got a fraction, whatever the denominator is, try to pick an x value that's divisible by that denominator. Then you'll have a nice point on the graph. And of course, you guys can grab your calculator if you want to do any of this. Like sometimes my brain doesn't want to do stuff with fractions. So if I do -1/2 times 4 minus 2, just type it right in your calculator if you want to save a little bit of time. That would be -6. Sorry, you can't see that on the screen. And if you don't know this trick, if you have typed something, like I typed that hit equals, if you hit second and then the enter button, it'll bring that right back. And I just realized it's -2, isn't it? Hopefully you didn't write that down because I totally wrote it in pen, didn't I? -4, my fault. Okay, let me start over. So if I do, I'm just going to show you this as a little trick on the calculator. So I did -1/2. We multiplied that by 4 because that was the inequality. And then we should have typed -2. Now, if you need to find more points, if you want to just hit second and then enter, it'll bring back what you just put, but then you can edit it. And I could put in like a 6. Or if I wanted to put in, again, I'm just plugging in even numbers here because I know that that's divisible by 2, so it'll give me a nice point instead of a 0.5 on the graph, so I don't have to estimate. And then you just really need 2 points to connect the dots here, but this should only go on the right side of that second boundary line there that we drew. So for -4, I'm going to have a closed circle. And honestly, from here, if you wanted to use the slope, you could just use the slope. Just go down 1/2. You'll notice that'll be the next point I wrote down was 6, -5. I could just go down 1/2, or you could just go ahead and use the points in the table. But that third piece should be a ray that points to the right. None of these should overlap. You should just have one piece in each section. If they go into the other section, then maybe you weren't following the domain values you were supposed to use. So the first piece is only left of -3. The second piece is in between -3 and 4 for your x values. And then the third piece, x value is bigger than 4, so it would only go to the right. Okay, let's try one more here before we'll do a little bit more complicated one on the back. Okay, so again, you don't have to, but my first recommendation, I'm just going to draw a little dotted line to show myself where these switch over. So if I'm looking at these inequalities, we're going to switch over at -2. So I'm going to do a nice vertical line at -2. And then it also switches over at +3. So just doing a nice vertical line. All these x values are 3. And that way I know which ones to switch between. So again, I'm just going to grab the first piece. It's going to be left of -2. So I'm just going to make myself like a little tiny t-table, -x minus 4, and start with whatever that value is in the inequality. This one's similar to the one we just did where it was less than, just a plain less than. So I know this is an open circle. Okay, and then if you want to look at the graph like visually, like we're just going to go to the left here. So if you want to, I mean, just look, if you want to look at the x-axis, pick numbers. My slope there is just -1, so I don't have to worry about a fraction or anything like that. But just pick some number on the left side here. So like if you want to use -3 or if you want to use -4, there's nothing that would restrict anything there in terms of like multiplying by a fraction or anything. So if I just do, now this is negative, and then I'm going to plug in -2 minus 4. So if I do that, that's going to be -2. Okay, now, if you type that in your calculator, if you just hit second enter, you can go back and edit that number. So I'm going to change it to -3. Be -1. I'm going to hit second enter, go back and change it, and you guys can probably figure this out. This would be 0. Alright, now when I plot the point, just that first point, that -2, -2, should be an open circle. And then these should just go to the left. If they don't, then I pick the wrong numbers. So like -3, -1, -4, 0. You guys can see that slope down 1/1, but it should just go to the left. So that one's going to kind of point up as you go to the left. Now the second piece is just a line, right? 2x plus 1. So if I'm in between, especially if you have a line, if you're in between, just use those two values that you have in the inequality. So just the -2 and the 3. Both of these guys will be closed circles. And if we can find these 2 points, we can just play connect the dots. And of course you guys can, you don't have to use your calculator, but I'm just using mine. Alright, so if I do 2 times -2 plus 1, that'll give me -3. And then I'm just going to go back in there and I'm going to delete the negative and plug in a 3. So that'll give me 7. Now, between these 2 points, because this is just a line, we can just play connect the dots. So -2, -3, just right below where we were at. And then 3, 7 would be up here. And I'm just going to do my best to connect those two. If you don't want to do it like that, if you can find the starting point, you could just use the slope and just go up 1/1, up 1/1 until you get to the next vertical line that you drew, or you could just plot those 2 points. It's totally up to you. Now the last piece, hopefully this one will be kind of quick to do because it's just a horizontal line. So it's just going to do x. The y value then is just -3. There's nothing for us to plug in. This is for x values that go right. A +3, but always start with the actual value that's in the little inequality. This guy will be an open circle because it just says x is greater than 3. You'll notice I have a closed circle up here on that last piece, so we can't have another closed circle. And then just think of a number. It doesn't matter what it is. We could do like 4, we could do 5. No matter what, you're not plugging anything in because it's just going to be a horizontal line. So the y coordinates will all just be -3 for the rest of this graph. So on this second vertical line we drew, I'm going to go 3 down to -3, open circle, and then these points would just continue, be a nice horizontal line at -3. But it's only going to the right of that line. There should not be any overlap because this is a function. Is anybody having a question? Now, I have a little parabola, and then we're going to do some evaluating. Okay. I'm going to draw my little vertical lines here at -1 and 4. Okay. Now, that first piece, you'll notice, that's not a line. You can make a table just like I was doing if you want to. I'm just going to think about, okay, how would that parabola look? Because it's not like a connect the dots situation if you have a parabola. So if I just look at this first piece, feel free to make a table if you want to. What I'm going to think about is the vertex would be opposite copy -3, 5, and has a little -1 in front of it. So the pattern would be -1, -3, -5. what I'm going to do, let me see if the vertex is in the piece, because I just want to go, basically I just want to go on the left side of that first part. So I just want to go on the left side here. If you look at where that vertex would be, that's at -3, 5. So right in here. So that's totally in the area it's supposed to be. I'm only going to go to the left side of this line. So if I did my little pattern, over 1, down 1 on either side, and then I did over 1, down 3. Now, on the side, it is going to be an open circle where it connects to that line, right? And then I'm not going to go any farther to make this going to the right, so I'm just going to kind of make my parabola, but it's only pointed to the left side there because it's going to stop right on that lovely -1. If you guys do want to make a table, I would just do maybe a couple more, like we just did 2 points or maybe 3 points. I would do a couple more so you can kind of get the shape of the parabola, or you could just graph it, but don't go beyond that little boundary line there. The second piece, I would go ahead and use like a little table because it's just a line. You got -2x plus 3. This will just be connect the dots because that's just a line. That's mx plus b between -1 and 4. And both of those guys would be closed circles there. So just plug them in. So if I did -2 times -1 plus 3, this is 5. And then if I plug in 4, I'm going to delete the negative sign real quick. This is -5. So between these two vertical bars, at -1, I am at +5 with a closed circle. And all the way over at the 4, we're at -5, also with the closed circle. This is just a line. This is not a parabola, so that's why I only need 2 points to make a line, so I can just play connect the dots with that piece. And that hopefully looks like to you it's -2. The third piece is just a nice horizontal line, my favorite. So the y-coordinate, no matter what, is 5. That would start at 4 with an open circle and just go to the right of that. So at that boundary line where you're at 4, I'm going to go back up here to 5, open circle, and then it should just be nice horizontal line pointed to the right. None of those pieces overlap. Is anybody having a question? Okay. Now, yesterday we evaluated, and I gave you a graph, and I would be like, okay, f of whatever, and we'd find it on the graph. So let's say I don't have a graph, which is what's going on in my second example. If I just straight up give you the equation, could you evaluate the function? So this one says g of x, and then it gives you 3 pieces here. So how would I figure out if I don't have a picture of this? I mean, we could draw a picture, but I don't have a graph for us here. So if I don't have a picture, like how would I figure out that function evaluated, let's say at 7? Like what would you do to figure it out?
Do you plug it into like one where it's like less than or whatever, and if it's true, then
You're on the right track. We're going to plug it in. Like, how would I figure out which piece to use? Like, what would you look at?
Yeah, so you put it in for one of the ones on the right. The other one's true, and use the equation that matches up with.
So which one of those 3 would you use for that? For if I was plugging in 7? The bottom one, right? Okay, so basically, let me read this to you. Okay, this would be for x values less than or equal to 1. So if I gave you a number that was 1 or smaller, you would use that first piece. If I gave you a number, this would literally be between 1 and 3, but not equal to either one of those. So like if I gave you 1.5 or 2, we would use that. And then the third piece, that's what we're going to use for this one. This would be for any number bigger than or greater than or equal to 3. So since this is 7, I would use the third piece. So this would be 6 minus 2 times 7. I'm using that third piece because that's the category that x value would fall into if we had a picture on the graph. And then we can just actually evaluate this. So this would be 6, what would it be? 6 minus 14? So we're going to get negative 8. So that would be my actual answer. But you got to figure out which piece to plug it into. Okay, so like 2 would fall into the category of between 1 and 3. So we would plug this guy into the second piece. Now, the second piece is just negative 10. So there's nothing for me to plug in, if you will, for x. So it would literally just be negative 10. Let's see. Negative 4 would fall into the category of being smaller, less than or equal, not equal to, but less than negative 1. So I would use, we'd have 2, absolute value, and we'd put in that x value. So negative 4 is going to fall into that category. Now remember, with the absolute values, they act like grouping symbols, so you have to put those two numbers in the absolute value. You have to add those first and then take the absolute value. So this would be 2 times negative 3 in the absolute value, which would then turn into 2 times positive 3. The absolute value would make that positive. So then that would be 6. So make sure, working with the absolute value, get it down to one number before you take the absolute value. Which piece of the 3, would the first, second, or third, where would you plug 3 in if 3 was your x value? Brody, what do you think? Because? Exactly. This one is just less than 3. This one is greater than or equal to. So if it's equal to 3, we'd use that third piece. So 6 minus 2 times our x value. So this would actually be 6 minus 6. So that last answer would be 0 if we evaluated that. Is anybody having a question? Okay. Now, I have this weird combo problem. So there are 3 different things going on in this bottom example. So I just have a straight up, like a function rule. So it just says f of x equals negative 2x plus 5. Just a little function rule. We have not done any with this yet, so I think this could be kind of tricky. I have a table. So g of x is represented by this table here. And then my third representation is a lovely piecewise graph. And this one says h of x. All right, so we're going to deal with the table first, because that's g of x. And this says find g of 10. So if you're looking at that lovely table, what would you guys tell me g of 10 is? Negative 17, exactly. So they're giving you the x value. G of x then is just the corresponding value. So you're finding 10 in the table and then writing down the corresponding value. So what would you tell me for that table for g of 4? Negative 8, exactly right. Now this next one is kind of a combo. So I got to get from the table, what would g of 8 be from the table? What would you get if you did g of 8 from the table? Negative 4. Yep, just here's the x value. This is just negative 14. Now, the other piece of this says minus h of 2. So h, if you're looking at those different representations, is going to be the graph. So h of 2, again, we did some like this yesterday. So 2 is your x value. So here's 2, and you want to meet the graph. Now, in this case, I have an open circle right there, so we don't want to use that. We want to use the closed circle, and that's up at 3. So the h of 2 part of this would be 3. The actual little problem is negative 14 minus 3. So then ultimately my answer to that question, it's kind of 2 problems in one. That's negative 17. All right. Part D, we have f of 4 divided by g of 4. All right, now f, this is just a little equation here. That's all I have to do. Just plug in 4 for x. So I'm just going to do, let's see, it's negative 2 times my x value, which is 4 plus 5. So the top of this would be negative 3. Now, g of 4, so if I'm looking at the table, what you want to do, find your lovely x value of 4, and then tell me the corresponding value that goes with that, which would be the negative 8. Not much to do here, but those two negatives do cancel out, so 3/8 positive is how you'd want to write your answer for that one. Okay, now these last couple in this grouping here, Both of these are composition, but it's two different ways to write it. So you have that little open circle notation, and if you remember, if it's in this format, whatever's closer goes first. If you don't like that format, this would be f of h, of negative 6. Those would be equivalent. What that means is I need to find h of negative 6 first. So h is the lovely graph here. So if my x value is negative 6, what would my y value be on that graph? 4. Okay, now once you have that, you're substituting that in place of h of negative 6. So the ultimate answer to the question is whatever f of 4 is, and isn't that beautiful because we did that in that last problem, so we don't have to calculate that again. So the answer there should be negative 3. Now, if I didn't notice that, you would just plug 4 into the function that says f of x for x. Okay. Now, don't get angry with the fraction here. I'm going to do f of 3 over 2. So the f of x function is just that little equation that we have there, little function rule. So I'm going to do negative 2 times 3 over 2, and I'm going to add 5 to that. Don't worry, it'll be a nice number. So that's 2. Then we're going to do g of 2 to get our final answer there. So if you look at the g function, that's the table, and the x value 2 would go with g of x value of negative 5. So the negative 5 would be your answer there. Is anybody having a question? Okay. Now, we did these yesterday, and that number 6 on the homework assignment. So let me have you look at these. This is giving you like the y value. You got to tell me the x value. So if I'm looking in the table and I tell you my answer is negative 11, what does that mean I plugged in? So if I'm looking at the table, I tell you the answer is negative 11. What did I plug in? Or what would the x value be? The 6? Yeah. Negative 11 is the answer. 6 was what I had to have for my x value. Now, if you look at the graph, so I just did one of each here. H of x is negative 1. So let me just come over here. Negative 1 is my y value. So I'm just going to do like a little dotted line. So anywhere that crosses there, and there's 2 spots. So here and here. You're just grabbing me the 2 x values. So that middle piece there crosses that line with the x value is 0, and then this third piece crosses that line when the x value is 4. So there's 2 different x values that would give me a y value of negative 1 in that picture. Now the last one is probably the trickiest. So it says f of x equals 25, right? Now basically what that's saying is 25 would be equal to this function rule, the negative 2x plus 5. So I would just do a little algebra here. We're working backwards to figure out the x value. I know the y value is 25, so just subtract 5 here. You get 20 is equal to negative 2x. Divide by negative 2 real quick. And it must mean that if we plugged in negative 10 to that function rule, then the result would be 25. Is anybody having a question? That last part is kind of a mix